Imagine a world where you never have to worry about food. There is always water. There is always shelter. There are no predators, no winter, no disease spreading from the outside world. No humans hunting you, no competition for survival. You could eat whenever you wanted, sleep whenever you wanted, and live your entire life without facing a single natural threat. It sounds like paradise. But in 1968, a scientist named John Calhoun created something remarkably close to that paradise. And what happened inside it became one of the strangest experiments in the history of behavioral science. Because the animals didn't die from hunger. They didn't die from thirst. They didn't die because a predator attacked them. They had everything they needed. And yet, their society collapsed. This was Universe 25. And its story begins with just 8 mice. In July 1968, Calhoun placed 4 male and 4 female mice inside a specially designed enclosure. It was a controlled environment built to remove almost every external danger. There was plenty of food, plenty of water, nesting material, shelter, and protection from predators. The enclosure was designed with multiple feeding stations, water sources, nesting areas, and spaces where the mice could move around. There was only one major thing they could never escape: each other. At first, everything went exactly as you might expect. The mice explored their new environment. They established territories, they built nests, they found food, and eventually, they started reproducing. The population began growing rapidly. At first, it doubled roughly every couple of months. 8 mice became dozens, dozens became hundreds, and by around day 315, the population had reached about 620. From the outside, this looked like a huge success. The mice were healthy. The food supply hadn't disappeared. The water hadn't run out. The enclosure still had available space. The population should have continued growing. But something had changed. The problem wasn't the amount of food. It was the way the mice were interacting with one another. As the population increased, the social structure became more complicated. Mice normally have social hierarchies. Some males become dominant, others become subordinate. Females raise their young, territories are established, and individuals develop roles within the group. But as more and more mice appeared, those normal social structures began breaking down. Sure, there were too many individuals competing for the same social spaces, and something strange happened. The enclosure still had physical space, but socially, there wasn't enough meaningful space. Some areas became extremely crowded, while other areas remained relatively unused. Groups of mice gathered around particular feeding and nesting locations. Aggressive encounters increased. Some males were pushed away from the main social groups. Others became unusually aggressive. Females also began displaying abnormal behavior toward their young. The normal pattern of courtship, reproduction, parenting, and territorial behavior was beginning to fall apart. Calhoun described this broader breakdown in social organization as a behavioral sink. And then came the most disturbing part. The mice were still physically capable of reproducing. They still had food, they still had water, they still had shelter. But reproduction began slowing down. The population growth almost came to a halt. By around day 600, the last surviving birth had occurred. The colony had not reached the physical capacity of the enclosure. Instead, its social system had deteriorated before the environment itself ran out of resources. The population eventually peaked at roughly 2,200 mice. Then, it began to fall. The decline wasn't simply a matter of mice dying faster than they were born. Their behavior had fundamentally changed. Some males withdrew from normal social interactions. They stopped competing for territory. They stopped courting females. They mostly ate, drank, slept, and groomed themselves. Some females struggled to raise their young. Infant survival dropped dramatically. The social behaviors that had once allowed the colony to reproduce and function were disappearing. And once those behaviors disappeared, the population couldn't recover. By the early 1970s, the colony was approaching complete extinction. The experiment that had started with 8 mice had eventually produced thousands, and then almost nothing. This is the moment where the story becomes much bigger than mice, because Calhoun wasn't only interested in rodents, he was interested in what their behavior might tell us about human societies. He wondered what could happen when a population becomes so crowded that normal social relationships begin to break down. And that idea became extremely controversial. Some people began treating Universe 25 as a warning about humanity. They imagined modern cities as giant versions of Calhoun's enclosure. More people, less personal space, more competition, more social pressure, and eventually, social collapse. But there is a major problem with that comparison. Humans are not mice. Universe 25 does not prove that human civilization will collapse simply because people become comfortable or because populations become dense. Human beings have language, culture, technology, institutions, the ability to change our environment, and perhaps, most importantly, the ability to recognize a problem and deliberately change our behavior. Modern human societies are vastly more complicated than a mouse colony inside a controlled enclosure. So the real lesson of Universe 25 may not be comfort destroys civilization. It may be something more interesting. The mice had almost everything they needed to survive. But survival isn't the same thing as having a functioning society. A society isn't built only from food, water, and shelter. It is also built from relationships, roles, boundaries, social interaction, parenting, cooperation, and the ability of individuals to find some kind of place within the larger group. When those systems began breaking down, the unlimited resources couldn't save the colony. And that is what makes Universe 25 so disturbing, because the experiment wasn't showing what happens when life becomes difficult. It was showing what happened when almost every traditional difficulty was removed. But the social problems remained. Maybe that is why the experiment continues to fascinate people decades later. Not because it predicted the future, it didn't, but because it forces us to ask an uncomfortable question. What does a society actually need to remain healthy? Is food enough? Is safety enough? Is comfort enough? Or do living creatures need something more? A sense of purpose, social connection, personal space, and meaningful roles within their community. The mice of Universe 25 never had to worry about surviving the outside world. They only had to survive each other. And eventually, they couldn't. The experiment ended with an empty world, a world that had everything, except a functioning society. And perhaps the darkest part isn't that the mice lived in a perfect world. It's that even paradise has limits.